What if Coyote Stark was still alive and, like Grimjaw, was recruited to fight in the 1,000-year blood war against the Quinces? And now that we have an idea of how powerful he was before he divided his soul into Stark and Lilinette, let's see how he performs as an Espada versus how he would perform in his original state. Being ranked as the Primera, or the number 1 Espada, spoke volumes of Stark's power. Since the Espadas were ranked in descending order of increasing lethality, spiritual power, and overall combat capability, essentially according to their true strength, Stark was the second strongest, who deserved the title of number 1, surpassed by Yami, who deserved the title of number 0, whose power was unsurpassed by all Espada in the Wakomunda arc. Stark was able to go toe-to-toe with Shunsui Kyoraku in Shikai state. At one point he fought both Shunsui and Jushiro. At another he defeated both Love and Rose, and he almost made Shunsui Bankai after releasing Zero Metralleta. It is therefore understandable when it's stated that Shunsui was pushed to his limits in that Shikai state, but still managed to surpass that. It's the same situation with Robert Akitron, in which Kyoraku openly admitted to being pressured and then required a resolve amp. But then how did Shunsui use that same Shikai to fight Lilebaro, who is completely beyond Robert Akitron? Well, the answer is the same as the Stark situation. It's because Katen Kyokutsu was not in the mood to play certain games. But against Lilebaro, it unleashed a whole new set of broken abilities. Shunsui's effectiveness therefore depends on its resolve and the amount of games available to play. And for Stark's sake, it's worth noting that Shunsui's combat power didn't change after the Arrancar arc. Now, as for Stark's original state, that is, before dividing his soul into Stark and Lilinette, he was said to be so powerful that even Aizen didn't want to go through the trouble of facing him. The same Aizen who was known to subdue powerful Arrancars or Vastralorde with his Kyoka Suigetsu and his Ureiatsu. So if Stark would have been trouble for that Aizen, it speaks volumes of his spiritual pressure and combat abilities. It might even be the same as the Unohana situation. So how would Espada Stark do against the Quincy? Having similar physical stats to Shunsui Kyoraku would mean that Stark would be able to take on the majority of the Sternritters in individual battles. And one massive key factor would be his hollow spiritual pressure, which is poisonous to Quincy. The Quincy have no antibodies to purge hollow spiritual pressure. In other words, even a fiber of hollow power could be devastating to a Quincy's soul. Even hollowifying a stolen Bankai for an instant would immediately cause the Quincy's body to reject the Bankai's presence. And when Espadas like Stark or Grimjaw undergo resurrection, they become entirely hollow. In other words, as soon as Stark enters Resurrection, because of its poisonous nature, it won't be stolen like Bankai, and due to its corrosive nature, a blast of Zero or a cut from his sword would be devastating, especially when you consider the volume of spiritual pressure that Stark can produce, creating piles of dead hollows from his passive spiritual pressure, even before becoming an Espada. And as the Primera, he can fire thousands of Zeros in an instant, outputting so much Reiatsu that he pushed Shunsui to consider Bankai. Additionally, Stark can go even beyond the Metralleta with his ultimate power, his Wolves. So considering that Stark was able to go toe-to-toe with Shunsui Kyoraku, his Reiatsu is literally poison to the Quinces, which he has in high doses. His attacks are virtually infinite and can cover a wide area. He can summon sentient wolves to assist in combat. His intelligence, which was praised by both Shunsui and Ukitake, allows him to quickly see through his opponent's style. His real struggle would be the more exceptional Quinces or the more exceptional abilities, like Asnaut's Tatar Foras, which can destroy the mind with fear simply by having you look at him, no contact necessary. Or Royd, who could clash with Shikai Yamamoto and engage with his Bankai Zankanutachi, a level of power superior to Shinigami Aizen, who was above the Espadas like Stark. Other troublesome opponents include Kilgei, who could tank Ichigo's full-bring Shikai Getsuga Tensho and use Clavirai to absorb beings who are stronger than him. And of course, Gremid's Visionary, which could create even outer space and heavily damage an awakened Eyepatch Kenpachi, should prove too much for Stark alongside the Schutzstaffel, who are supposed to be the elites. Even Shunsui had to unlock additional games to trap Lilebaro. On the other hand, Pernida's behavior is a bit more unpredictable, and Asking has the wits and means to take down Stark without touching him. Furthermore, the successor class Quinces like Uryu and Yugram should be beyond Starrk, considering their speed, attack power, and powers of reversal. But how would Starrk perform in his original state before his division, considering that even Sosuke was wary of fighting him? While we can't say that he would possess any of his unique Espada abilities, he should have the standard Vassalordi powers like Sonido, which when in use would allow him to evade the spiritual senses of the Stern Ritters, given that Sonido cannot be traced spiritually. And with spirit energy so much greater that he could take on Aizen, his speed should also be significantly greater. That is, given the relationship between spiritual energy and speed, especially for the high-level Menos whose spiritual powers apply directly to their bodies. Starrk would also possess a hero or iron skin for defense, and perhaps the most standard Menos class ability, the Zero. With the enormous levels of spiritual power, Starrk would become even more poisonous to the Quinces, and with increased speed and Aizen class power, he'd be far superior to characters like Shunsui Kyoraku in terms of stats. With that monstrous combination of power and speed, accompanied by high doses of poisonous spiritual pressure, most Stern Ritters would be dealt with in an instant. Even the likes of Asnot would more than likely not get a chance to employ his abilities, with most of them getting shredded to pieces by Stark's claw or sword, or completely eliminated in massive blasts of spiritual power. Starrk would become more imposing to Gremmy Thamu, who can still win depending on how he fights, given how broken the Visionary actually is. And since Gremmy, who is the brain itself, was able to withstand the vortex of spiritual pressure inside Hikone, which included hollow spiritual pressure, Gremmy might have much more resistance to hollow spiritual pressures than many other Quinces. Notwithstanding Pernider's rank as a Schutzstaffel, he might end up being very susceptible to Stark's power, since his nerves are based on direct contact, and Stark's Reiatsu might have a corrosive nature like Mayuri's acid. And considering the fact that Pernida requires time to evolve, for Lidebaro his best chance would be in Volstendish, where he can't be touched. Considering that his senses, on which he is very reliant, would be useless against Stark's Sonido, and even he would be vulnerable to Stark's Reiatsu, which is poisonous. And of course, a Schutzstaffel member like Gerard is just a walking cheat code, warping reality by turning feelings into power through the miracle. He's not unkillable in his weaker forms, but once he starts to evolve, he becomes a problem. He could match a fully unleashed Shikai Zaraki, who was stronger than the base awakened Kenpachi, to whom Aizen expressed caution. As it pertains to the high-level Quincy and Schutzstaffel, with most of them it comes down to timing and efficiency, because if some of them are allowed to adapt to Stark's power, it's pretty much game over. Now, interestingly, according to Kubo, Uryu actually has a very strong resistance to hollow spiritual pressure because of his nature. And combining that resistance with his ability to steal power from Starrk using Sclaverai, along with his intellect, newly acquired Reishi abilities, Volsterndish, and the Antithesis, which can reverse phenomena between two designated points, Uryu does have the advantage. And the same goes for Yugram, who is second only to Yuhabaha, whose role as the next emperor is a reflection of his power, with the capacity to wield a limited yet still powerful version of the Almighty, and the power to tip the scales of fortune and misfortune. He would also be victorious. So overall, as an Espada, Starrk still does great, but the original Undivided Stark would be an absolute nightmare. That is, going by the power interpretation. Definitely like and subscribe and comment as well, and I'll see you all soon. Cheers.